Stacey is owner, operator of FemSTRONG, right? And that is a perinatal focused fitness service program, many things. I'll let you just pick it up from there.
Yeah. So FemSTRONG is my company. It's my brand. We focus on perinatal exercise and perinatal wellness. So I partner with some girls who also do perinatal nutrition. That's not my specialty, but I work with them to provide them as a resource. So yeah, all things perinatal wellness, from exercise to nutrition to the pelvic floor. We're trying to simplify that knowledge and bring it to women in a way that makes their lives a lot easier, so they're not having to sift through information on the internet and try to track it down themselves. We've done the research, worked with the pelvic floor physical therapists, and created helpful guides and resources for women, particularly women who love to be active, who love to lift, have really active hobbies and love to move, and are wondering, how can I keep doing as much of what I love as possible through my pregnancy? And where do I need to adjust? What can I do? What is maybe not such a great idea? Yeah, that's what we do.
Okay.
And my background is that I've been in the fitness world, strength and conditioning wise, for a little over a decade. I owned a CrossFit gym in Reno, Nevada for a little while, and a couple summers ago actually closed that, and am now focusing primarily on the perinatal season. So I got into this side of the fitness world after friends started getting pregnant. And being that I was coaching, I had multiple of my friends who are now pregnant, and they started learning a little bit more about it, got connected with pelvic floor PTs, and they were like, Stacey, you need to know this stuff. And so as I started learning from them, I was like, you're right, this is crazy. So crazy that we don't already know it in the fitness world, and more people are getting up to speed. So I started working closely with a pelvic floor physical therapist in Reno, and we started putting on the FemSTRONG seminar, which covered pelvic floor, perinatal exercise, and nutrition. And then that grew more into what I do now with FemSTRONG. So I actually started with learning directly from that pelvic floor physical therapist. She referred her sister to work with me on her strength. She had some pelvic floor concerns, so I collaborated with her to train her sister, and then also collaborated with her as I was training more and more pregnant and postpartum athletes in my classes and one-on-one. So since closing the gym and realizing that this was the direction I wanted to go, I wanted to learn more. So since then, I've now taken the female athlete course with Dr. Anthony Lowe, and also done a course with a great doctor out of Canada. Her name is Mandy Milliket, and she does the hormone performance connection. So those are some new toolkits or new tools that I've added to my toolkit. So kind of a long answer, but a lot of my background is in the strength world, strength conditioning, and I've really enjoyed combining that with what I've learned about perinatal and pelvic floor, and helping women bridge the gap between those two.
Okay. That's a lot. Thank you.
And is that too much?
No, it's great.
Okay.
It brings us to today. Now you're in Austin, Texas now.
I am. Yes.
No more Reno, Nevada.
No more Reno.
And so you provide training in person, but you also have other avenues for disseminating that information, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So I have a course online that women can go through, which has videos on the 3 topics, and you also get a guidebook, which is the notes that I'm going to be talking from a lot today is out of that guidebook. And then you could also work with me either virtually or in person. I'm at a gym in East Austin currently.
Okay. Great. Well, I liked getting to know you. We got to meet in person at some women in wellness functions around town. And so that's why I asked you to be here today. And so I mostly work with people who are pregnant and then sometimes postpartum. And of course, at Breastfeeding Success, we see people mostly postpartum.
Mhm.
And it's a big question that comes up. We know we need to be active. We know exercise or movement or something resembling that is important as part of just basic health during pregnancy, helping improve outcomes, pregnancy outcomes, the way they feel, plus birth outcomes, postpartum outcomes, minimizing injury to the pelvic floor and other body parts. So it's important, but it's really hard to know how much, what kind, and all of that. So
Mhm.
can you first maybe start out by talking about the benefits of staying active during pregnancy or movement during pregnancy, exercise? Like, or what do you mean by all of that?
That's a great question. So you already touched on some of the benefits, and that being staying strong, going into labor with a good amount of strength and fitness is beneficial. And then same thing with postpartum recovery, working out through your pregnancy has positive impacts on that. And also physical health benefits, not just for mom, but also for baby. And also the mental health benefits of moving your body is positively impactful on your mental state. And a really fun fact that I learned that I think is really exciting is exercise during pregnancy. When mom is exercising, the blood flow to the placenta is temporarily minimized. So it sounds like a terrible thing when we say that, because it's like, well, I don't want to do anything that is not sending blood efficiently to the placenta. But it's not necessarily that it's like making it less efficient, but it is minimized. But what that means is when the exercise stops and the increased blood flow returns to the placenta, what happens is new vasculature is created. So it actually increases the efficiency of blood flow to the placenta to exercise during pregnancy. So that's one of my favorite, like nerdy science, like why it's good for you reasons. It makes your efficiency of nutrient delivery to baby better. I think moms really love hearing that because for a lot of moms too, it can be, especially for women who love to move, they're wondering, like, is this actually good for my baby? Is it just what I want to do for me? And I think learning that one can be helpful because yes, it's great for baby, for you to move. And then I love your question of what does exercise during pregnancy even actually mean? And my answer for that is the same that it is across the board for most people, of moving in the ways that you enjoy moving is wonderful. It's exercise. Another thing that I think we do often is we think it needs to be a certain thing or it needs to look a certain way. And the truth is that there is not any one perfect plan of how to exercise or how to move during pregnancy. There's not like one avenue to get there. There is infinite ways to go about staying active during pregnancy. And my huge recommendation is that people don't sleep on walking. Something as simple as walking that is very accessible for everyone is fantastic exercise for you and for baby during your pregnancy. So as much as we get into all the details of like how your body changes and what ways are great to think about and how you might consider working on your strength work during pregnancy, if all of that is just like more detail for our listeners than you care to get into, let your takeaway be it can be as simple as you need it to be, and walking is amazing. So any movement is great movement, and we're going to get into some benefits to focusing on different things and some of the other nitty gritty, but moving in the ways that you love to move, full green lights.
What about vacuuming, mopping, washing dishes, doing homework? Does that count?
It absolutely counts. And that is such a good question. I don't have the like direct link to it or like what the actual study is. Maybe I can try to find it. But I recently saw something that was a study that they did with people who do that type of work, I think for a living. And they asked these people, they said, like, how often do you exercise? And they filled out their surveys and answered. And then what they did is they took the two groups. And in one group, they said, they educated them and they said, did you know that, because they had put like, they considered their exercise to be whatever they did on top of their work, right? Of like, oh, I go on walks or I go to the gym, whatever. But I don't think any of them said like, I exercise in my work. So they chatted with them. They said, did you know that actually what you're doing when you're vacuuming, when you're mopping, when you're putting these things away, like it's exercise, it's movement, it's good for your body. So like when you're vacuuming, it's like this movement that you would see in the gym, or they helped them draw these parallels. And with the other group, the control group, they didn't have that conversation. They just said, okay, thank you. And then they tracked these people, and the ones that they helped shift the perspective of those things being exercise, being movement, being good for their bodies, they saw significant changes in their health. And they found that the exercise of their work was more impactful because of their new perception.
Amazing.
Incredible.
So it's also about the conversations you have with yourself can make you more healthy. Of course. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mental health. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always like to count that for myself, because sometimes that's the exercise that I get is cleaning my house or doing my yard work or walking my dogs. But that counts. Like you said, walking is excellent. So that might make a lot of people listening feel better, because I imagine people who might watch this are either going to be, all over the place. But yes, you see a lot of athletes, people who identify as athletes because they love to do this stuff. It's a very important part of their existence. Exercise, like organized fitness routines and exercise. And then there are people who dread it, want nothing to do with it, and would prefer to just sit on the couch. But it's probably not true that you're sitting on the couch all the time. You're probably doing some other things too. And some things that might count as exercise, or things that don't sound so dreadful if you're trying to move more.
Yeah. So, and another great thing too is it doesn't need to be dreadful. I think something else that we often think to ourselves is, unless it's super hard, unless I'm absolutely dying throughout it or totally exhausted by the end, it wasn't exercise, and it wasn't good enough, or it wasn't good for me. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Exercise doesn't need to be miserable to be effective. It's just about moving our bodies, and that can be very pleasant. So yeah, definitely day-to-day tasks as you're moving about your stuff absolutely counts.
That's so good to hear. Thank you for saying that. Okay, so movement's important. Moving your body. Hopefully it's something that you don't hate doing. So that can be a bunch of different things. How about just in general, people who tend to be very active, who are used to being very active, doing a lot of exercise, fitness routines. Is there anything in particular that you like for them to know about being pregnant, and about maybe modifying those routines during pregnancy, maybe by trimester, like first trimester, what to focus on, or what to do more, avoid second, third trimester?
Yeah, absolutely. So this one is like, this is going to be a pretty big answer, because this is my stuff right here. So I'm going to start with the overarching points that matter at all times during pregnancy. So there are a few things that are really good to know, to be aware of, going into movement, fitness, activities during exercise for all trimesters, for all people. So the first one is that your aerobic capacity and your anaerobic capacity, which is basically what I'm talking about there, is when you're jogging or like out for a walk. That is aerobic movement where you're able to keep doing the rate of movement for a long period of time. So out walking is going to usually be aerobic for most people. When I'm jogging and I start to go really fast and I can't keep that pace anymore, that's when I start to hit my what's called my anaerobic threshold. And I need to slow down to continue going. So when I use those words, basically all I'm saying is like your body's ability in terms of breathing and heart rate to keep up with what you're doing. So
Okay.
your capacity in your aerobic and anaerobic is decreased during pregnancy. So especially for athletes or women who are quite active and used to feeling a certain way in their exercise, when they get pregnant, it can be very disorienting of like, man, this doesn't normally feel this hard. Or am I like, what's wrong with me? Am I just being lazy? Like, absolutely not. Truly, your body's ability to do these things is currently decreased. So it is okay to lower the bar and lower your expectation of how hard, how fast, how long you're going to go. Bring it down, bring it on back a little bit. And also rest assured that it does return. It doesn't mean that your capacity is going to be lowered forever, but during pregnancy, it is. So it's good for us to know that your capacity is a little bit lower across the board. Number one. Number two, during pregnancy, your body releases a hormone called relaxin. And the role of this hormone is to allow your hips and your body to move and create space for a baby to be there and also for birth. However, relaxin does not just affect your pelvic girdle. It doesn't just affect the places where baby is. It's throughout your whole entire body. So during pregnancy, women actually have higher flexibility and mobility. And so when you're moving, you want to be aware of that increased flexibility. And if you're doing things like yoga, for example, that high levels of flexibility are developed and kind of prioritized, it's not a good time to lean heavy into that and go deeper into the stretches. You might think it is. You might think, well, I have this relaxin going. I'm going to take advantage of it and increase my range of motion. But we want to be mindful of not pushing too deep past into stretches because there is a lot of that increased mobility at this time. And you want to make sure that the shapes you're making are shapes that are within your range, that you're moving in shapes that you can control and not pushing past and really like overstretching in that time. Because your body
there could be consequences to that later. You pay later. You get to do that beautiful downward dog now, but you pay later.
Exactly. Yeah. So sometimes what happens is the increased flexibility is there, but maybe the strength surrounding the joint isn't keeping up with the new shape that you're pushing it into. And so we can cause stress around the surrounding musculoskeletal components. So we just don't want to be like, wow, I have all this relaxing going. What a great time to work on my splits. Maybe not. Maybe not right now.
Okay. So hold back a little bit.
Exactly.
So get to the edge, but pull back a little bit. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I definitely had that experience. And I think I personally, I loved yoga and I did prenatal yoga against my will. I wanted to keep going to my regular yoga classes. And my very wise yoga teacher finally said, please stop coming to my classes. You're 6 months pregnant. I do not know how to help you during pregnancy, and I don't want you to get hurt. And I know that's possible. So go to a good prenatal yoga class. And then my prenatal yoga teacher, who is amazing too, was really aware of all of that and just made sure to constantly remind us, like, go to your edge, but pull back a little bit. Don't do too much. It might feel great now, it might look great now, but you may pay later. So I'm glad you said that because it can feel really nice. It can look really nice, but
yes. Yeah, especially if yoga is your thing. It can be because the flexibility is a component there. So it can be really exciting of like, oh, I can do this thing that previously I couldn't. But not necessarily the time to dive too far into exploring the new things. And
Okay.
so I love that. Okay, so the two we've touched on so far are the decreased capacity. Your capacity is a little limited, and the increased flexibility with the relaxin. Let's see here. The others to know are during pregnancy, your coordination is affected because your center of gravity, your center of balance is shifting, it's moving. And so during pregnancy, women are a little less coordinated. So, which maybe people listening are like, heck yeah, we are. But you want to be mindful of that. If you're really into activities or things that require high levels of coordination or skill, you just want to be aware of the fact that your coordination is going to be impacted. So if your things are like climbing or mountain biking or complex lifts, like if you're into the lifting and you like snatches or clean and jerks, those are things that require a fair amount of coordination and they're higher skill things. So my recommendation for that is not that you necessarily have to stop doing those things, but my strong recommendation is that you really operate well within your range. Same thing with the flexibility. It's just not the ideal time to be pushing end range of motion or skill. You want to operate with like weights that you know you move well with, and maybe routes if you're climbing that are well within your range, and paying attention to how you're feeling coordination wise. It doesn't mean you can't do things, but it is wise to know my coordination is affected right now, and so I can shift that expectation.
So you don't fall or, do something that you could get injured doing. So stay in the middle or bottom of your range, not at the top of your range. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. My recommendation is, if those are the things that you enjoy, keep doing the light version of them.
Okay.
So, and that's also, every individual is different. Some people hear the change in coordination and they're like, in that case, like, I'm just not going to do that thing throughout my pregnancy. And that's a great choice too. And a lot of the women that I work with are really after like, how much of this stuff can I keep doing because I love it and it's a big part of my life and a big part of my identity. And so, like you said, like staying at the low mid range of what you're able to do is a great way to still enjoy it while keeping the risk super low.
Okay. So I hear sometimes that pretty much any kind of exercise is safe as long as it doesn't hurt or feel wrong. But then I've heard, and I don't know, maybe it was listening to your podcast, I can't remember where I heard this, that might be good advice for a lot of people, but then there are other people, it's not going to feel wrong or bad, and they're going to keep doing it, but it still might be too much. So what is that?
Yes. I think I feel like you probably did hear that on my podcast, because I think I remember having that conversation. And if I'm remembering correctly, that conversation was with a guest that I had on who is a very active, athletic, really loves to go like 100%, and has now had 3 pregnancies. And she was reflecting on her first couple of pregnancies and saying, I wish that I had done even less than I did. That in the very beginning, I was trying to maximize as much as I could. And I wish that I had more patience in my perspective of knowing I would be able to do those things again, but not pushing as much. So I think this is a really important point. And for especially active women that I work with, a big part of my job is helping them dial back, helping them do a little less. And can you remind me what exactly the question was?
No, just that that's sort of some advice that in general is given. Like I've given it. It's just kind of an umbrella advice. Like if you did it before, right? If this is not new to you, if you did it before, you can keep doing it as long as it doesn't hurt or feel wrong.
Mhm.
But I'm wondering if if we question that wisdom a little bit because of something you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think as general advice, there's some truth to it, but and we'll talk a little bit more about some ways to identify, like, if something is maybe let's pull it back and do less of this thing or shift. But especially for people who really love to be way here, where they're always doing a lot, um, it's tough advice because it's not so easy to listen to your body when you're an athlete. So that age old wisdom of, like, listen to your body, take it easy, isn't always quite enough to formulate an assessment. So a couple of things that I help women pay attention to. One of the big ones is paying attention to being able to control the movement of, when you're doing this, is it well within your range? So whether that's the weight that you're moving, or like we talked about, the skill level of what you're accomplishing, like, are you able to do it with full control? Because it's not a great time to be reaching for that upper limit of maybe like barely making the lift, or pushing on a harder trail or a climb. So I would say generally pull it back. Number two, are you well within control? Can you move? Weight is a good example. Can you move calmly and with good technique through the range of what you're doing? Or is the weight pulling you out of position and causing you to struggle? A phrase that I really like is, you control the weight, don't let it control you. And I think especially during pregnancy and postpartum, that's valuable advice, that we're always wanting to be the one in command of what's happening. And if it's feeling a little bit at the edge, we want to dial it quite a bit back. It's kind of a complex answer for a simple question. Does that give you what you're looking for?
It does, and it sounds like this might apply mostly to people who are very athletic, who really do a lot related to fitness. Because, like you said, if they're an extreme athlete, they're used to it feeling wrong and bad. like they want it to hurt, right? It's gotta hurt. And so that might not be the best advice in that situation. But on the flip side of that, that kind of piece of wisdom there, like, if you have done it before. So a lot of times people are discouraged from trying new things during pregnancy, as far as exercise and fitness go. And so do you think that's kind of good general advice across the board, or what might you recommend?
Yeah, that one, for the most part, I disagree with. That it is totally fine to try something new during pregnancy. Especially in terms of fitness. So if you're thinking about maybe starting to lift during pregnancy, it's okay to do that. That's totally safe and totally fine. If you're wanting to start walking, but you haven't been walking, that's totally fine to do. What I would say is, if you're wanting, it wouldn't be the time to try to learn something that is very high skill and carries a high level of risk. So I wouldn't recommend trying something new like those other activities that we've talked about, of like necessarily mountain biking or rock climbing or something, or skiing, something that is much more demanding of the coordination, the skill, the learning. It's a great time to learn new things, but it can be a challenging time body-wise to learn the coordination of things. So if you're going to, it's physiologically safe, but I would get someone quite qualified to teach you. Not a good time to just throw yourself into a high skill new thing, but it's not necessarily true that you shouldn't start, say, yoga or lifting or walking, etc., if you have not been doing it. You're right. That's been a thing that we've said for a long time, of like, if you've been doing it, you can keep doing it. But we're finding that you can start something new. Or especially, it's been said, like, if you've been exercising, you can keep exercising. But they have found that there's no increased risk of starting to exercise when you're pregnant.
Okay. But maybe just stick with something that is not going to be too hard to learn as a beginner. So walking, swimming, yoga, if you do like maybe you choose something that's specific to pregnancy. So like you said, a qualified teacher. So you have a prenatal yoga teacher, maybe prenatal fitness instructor, lifting coach or trainer with experience working with someone who is pregnant. Is that kind of what you mean by a qualified?
Yeah, well, more when I said work with someone qualified, obviously I'm a huge proponent of working with like a perinatal trainer or perinatal yoga, but not everyone is going to be able to do that, which is a big part of why I'm passionate about having the podcast and having some online resources for women to learn the basics of what's important to know. Because some people want that, but a lot of people just want to know what's important and they want to move along. So I would say that when I said get someone super qualified, I meant if you're going to do anything skill wise that's new, like it's not that if I had a friend and she was like, I'm going to go learn how to ski this winter and she is in her first trimester, I'd be like, I love you. I want you to do what's fun, but get a great ski instructor, or maybe let's just wait a little bit on that one. So I meant more of like the higher skill things, anything that carries like a good amount of like required skill, coordination. Make sure you have a damn good teacher. I don't necessarily believe that you have to have like perinatal specific fitness in order to move during your pregnancy. So which
Right.
yeah, is so yeah, I mean, if you have access to perinatal yoga or like some perinatal yoga videos, rock and roll. But yeah, a lot of this stuff I would say totally fine to start, either way.
Okay. Understood. Thank you. Okay, so you were, and I kind of hijacked the conversation a little bit, sorry, but you were talking about the things that are important to know, kind of basic overarching guidelines related to pregnancy at all times. So first, second, third trimester.
Yeah.
Did you get to all of those?
Not quite.
Okay.
Let's see here. I have two more here. So the next one is that your ability to regulate body temperature is also less efficient. And so, especially here in Texas, being mindful of hot environments, I recommend reserving your intentional exercise for more climate controlled situations, especially if it's summer. But just knowing going in that your body's ability to regulate your temperature is not going to be as efficient. So if you're working out in a really hot environment, your body's not going to be as good at bringing your body temperature down. And so your likelihood of overheating is higher. So being aware of your environment and your temperature is a smart move. And then the last one is learning how to identify the feelings of pelvic heaviness or knowing about like pelvic floor symptoms. So pelvic heaviness is one that I talk with my clients, and they're like, I have no idea what you mean. I'm like, what are you talking about? But what someone might feel with pelvic heaviness is that sensation of if you've ever had a tampon in and it like, feels like it's like maybe trying to come out. That's a feeling that we want to pay attention to if we're having that sensation. Or it can be more subtle than that, of just feeling downward pressure in our pelvic floor. So we're talking like vagina, anus region. If we're feeling sensation there that's feeling like pressure or uncontrolled or having symptoms of incontinence with movements, we want to pay attention to that and adjust a little bit here. The concept that I like for this one is one that I refer to as find the fence. So if you notice that that is happening, if you notice that you're having a symptom when you do something like one of those, you want to assess the movement and pull it back to the point where you can do something similar if that's what you want to continue doing, but it doesn't cause the symptom. And it's fine So for example, this is easier when we have some sort of example. Say you love squatting. And I notice when I'm squatting with my normal, 25-pound dumbbells in each hand, so a total of 50 pounds, I notice that I'm starting to have some symptoms. If I was working with a client, we would say, okay, let's back it off a little bit. First thing we're going to try is if we breathe a little bit differently and time things differently, can we move that weight and not experience that symptom? And if not, we're going to back the weight down. We might squat instead to a box or do something a little bit different. You want to find a change that allows you to still do a version of the thing that's not causing the symptom. So it doesn't mean that we have to stop everything and run in the opposite direction and do nothing, but we want to find the fence. How can we stay in the yard? And the fence is where we're causing symptoms. So we want to stay in the fence and keep doing things inside of the fence. So those are the ones that apply across the board. General guiding principles.
Okay. I can totally relate to the squatting and that heaviness. That happened to me with my first baby for sure. Got to a point in yoga classes where I said, I don't think I should be doing that anymore. Mm-hmm. Squatting feels funny. Feels like some kind of swelling is happening down there.
Okay. Yeah, that was my next question, is maybe you have a better way of explaining it, or like another way of explaining it for our listeners.
I mean, we talk about it in the postpartum too. So if there is any pelvic floor injury that can cause that with, pelvic organ prolapse, things like that. Mm-hmm. Some people describe it as like a bulging sensation. They feel some bulging down there. Heaviness is a good one. Swelling, it can feel kind of like a swelling sensation, mm-hmm. Feeling a fullness that wasn't there before. So yeah, a lot of different ways to describe that heavy pelvic heaviness thing. But yeah, it definitely is something. So I'm glad you said that, because it's one that, most people don't find it it's not painful, and it might not even be all that noticeable sometimes. But if you're looking for it, you might go, oh, this is what they were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of those things that's important to listen to. Like you were talking about earlier with the advice of just listen to your body, or if you were doing it before, it's fine. And if it feels weird, don't do it. That's the kind of thing that would be very much overlooked by someone who is on the, very, very driven, active, loves to do all the things. They might think like, oh, it feels a little weird, but I'm pregnant, things are going to feel weird, and off we go. And that's one that we want to tune into and make some adjustments around. And yeah.
It doesn't seem all that alarming if it's not pain, or there's no visible sign of something. So yeah. Okay, so then trimester by trimester, do you have any specific ideas for people? Like in the first trimester, what are some of the things that might be more noticeable as far as how people are feeling, how the baby's developing, and then how you can kind of fit being active into that?
Yeah. So let's see. In the first trimester, it's a fun catch-22, because in the first trimester, in terms of like exercise and activities, it's not much needs to change. You can keep doing most everything that you enjoy doing. We do have those factors of like the relaxin is starting to be introduced, and we have like the decreased capacity of our like aerobic and anaerobic. But as far as like musculoskeletal changes, or like the shifting of your like center of gravity, we don't have as much of the like coordination impact yet, and we don't have much changes on like the types of movements that you could do because belly's there. So the first trimester, you have a lot of freedom to continue doing the things that you want to do. However, most women don't feel that great in their first trimester. So energy demand on the body is really, really high, because your body's like, hey, spoiler alert, we're bringing new life into the world. And fun fact, that's costing us a lot of energy. So a lot of women are really, really tired. There's a lot of energy being directed into the creation of new life. And that hits a lot of women like a truck. So many just feel exhausted, can't seem to get enough sleep. And obviously morning sickness is also a big part of the first trimester. So it can be a challenge to continue moving, even though it's the time that your movement is the least complicated. So my recommendation for first trimester is to move in the ways that you can and try to do something gentle, even if it's not the thing you'd like to be doing or what you're used to or what your ideal is. So a lot of women, this isn't a strict rule, but a lot of women do notice that movement helps their morning sickness or helps their nausea. So, but it's hard because the exhaustion and the nausea can make it really hard to do the movement. So if you can, I highly recommend moving in some way, whether that, like we talked about before, is a walk or what have you. And maybe just try to make note of like, is this positively impacting how I'm feeling, and take some notes, but also let yourself rest. It truly is a huge energy demand. So first trimester, it's catch-22. You can do a lot. You don't want to. So yeah.
There's a really fun podcast episode I just listened to by Radiolab called Everybody's Got One. And it's about the placenta and about, it's just a fun perspective on the placenta and what it does. And basically they talk about it as like a war being waged in your body when you're pregnant between your body and the placenta.
Oh my God.
And,
I love that.
Yeah. And so, like you said, that energy demand on your body is because it's kind of waging a war. And so the placenta wants the blood, but your body still needs some blood. And so there's just, it can make you feel not so great. And that makes sense. And so sometimes thinking about it that way, like, oh, my body is working really hard right now. Like I'm just sitting here and my body's working really hard. Maybe I should give myself a break. Sometimes you just have to do that, right?
Amen. And when you said that, the war with the placenta, my brain said, and the placenta wins.
Well, this is a fun podcast episode. My son actually brought it to my attention. He was like, Mom, did you know about placenta? And I was like, wait a minute, you're coming to talk to me about placentas? I try to talk to you about placentas all the time. But he loves that. He likes that podcast. But oh,
I love that.
Really amazing. And so the goal, according to this podcast and the scientists they interview for it, is that neither side wins. Mm-hmm. They need to keep battling, but nobody, ideally nobody wins.
Yes, I love that. Right. Right. Yeah. I guess what I mean by that is the body's really good at prioritizing baby. So whatever nutrient deficiency is there, mom is going to be the one to experience it. Whatever energy deficit is there, mom is going to be the one to experience it. So very important to fuel.
Yeah.
And give your body the rest that it needs, because all that energy demand.
Yeah. Take care of the body.
Yeah. So that's the first trimester. And then let's get into number 2 and number 3. I'll try to keep it as brief as I can. So second trimester, most women experience that they are feeling a little better. Second trimester has a reputation for kind of being the golden window where the exhaustion lays off a little bit, the nausea backs off or goes away. So the women that I work with are like, okay, we can do more. And they're having a little more fun with it. So those of you in your first trimester, second trimester is coming. It's all going to be okay. So in the second trimester, some things to consider is that we are now going to be seeing the changes in like bellies coming in. So a big topic in the perinatal space is the diastasis recti, which is the separation of the abs. And for a long time, it was kind of perceived as this like, oh my gosh, do you have a diastasis? And like, oh my gosh, I have a diastasis and this is a huge problem. But actually, a diastasis is a natural part of pregnancy where the abdominals move so that belly can grow. And it is designed that way. It's supposed to happen. We can run into some trouble if they over time postpartum, if sometimes there's some stubbornness in them of wanting to move back toward each other a little bit, or they're not as efficient, but we can talk about that later. But in the second trimester, we start to get that ab separation and belly is starting to get bigger. So we want to start adjusting to exercises that are accounting for that. So especially for my women who are in more of a like structured fitness exercise workout type routine, what that means is there's some impact on some of your core work. So things like sit-ups, or if you do toes to bar, hanging leg raises, that type of stuff can A, start to get a lot harder, and B, it's not necessarily the most positively impactful work that we can be doing. It's not necessarily bad to do it. But it's like what we were talking about with the yoga, leaning deep into the stretches. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So second trimester is when we want to start maybe choosing some other options for core work. So the things that I love to bring in for my clients instead of stuff that's very specific core focused is I love doing a lot of carries with my pregnant clients. So I'll give them a kettlebell and have them hold it at the chest and they walk with that kettlebell. And or we can do a mixed carry where they have one here, one at their side, or one here, one overhead. I love a good carry. Fun fact, as you get into the momming, you're gonna be carrying a lot of stuff. So it's also good preparation for the momhood. So I like carries a lot in the second trimester and across the board. But second trimester is when we start to have more of those considerations of belly is coming along. So
Maybe you can answer this curiosity that I've had for a while, and I haven't gotten a chance to ask anybody. With the diastasis, I know, it happens, and then ideally it moves back together afterwards. But like when you're pregnant and you have that abdominal separation happening, when you do something like a sit up, or even like if you're just laying in bed and you get up out of bed, you can see that coning, right? That weird like ridge down the middle of your belly that happens when you do it. And I didn't know what it was when I was pregnant, but now I know, like, that's your organs kind of squishing up through that new separation. Your abdominal wall used to hold that stuff back, and now there's a separation there. And that's kind of like the way I think of it in my head is like, that's my gut squishing up through there, which I don't know that's exactly correct, but it seems like maybe something that shouldn't be happening. So if that's happening, is it harmful? Like, could we be making it worse than it needs to be by doing things that create that coning?
I love that question. That's such a good question. So what's the simplest way to answer? I prefer not to have my pregnant clients doing movements that cause coning. So as we're doing exercise, I'm going to avoid movements that cause excessive coning. Absolutely. That doesn't mean that, say you start to sit up in bed and you cone, that doesn't mean that that's bad or dangerous or going to cause harm. But yes, it's not something that we want to like work into our exercise routine. So when we notice coning, yes, we want to do something different. And here's why. Okay, two reasons why. So what you're talking about the protrusion, that space in between your rectus abdominis are the ones in the front here that we're talking about when we talk about the diastasis. They're connected by what's called the linea alba. And the linea alba, as your rectus abdominis moves, it gets put under tension because it's getting stretched along with everything.
Is that like connective tissue?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you. So that's the connective tissue. Now, what happens when we're coning is the abdominal pressure is pushing the linea alba up. So that is what we see when you have the coning happening, is that protrusion. So something that we want to look out for is if the linea alba is under so much tension that it's firm. So if when I'm doing something, the linea alba is still squishy, then it's not under enough tension to be problematic. Is this making sense?
Yes.
Okay. So let's back it up a little bit and talk about intra-abdominal pressure. So now we're referring back to some of the pelvic heaviness that we talked about before. So your pelvic floor is the muscles that are essentially like the hammock in your hip girdle. So we have our hips, pelvic floor muscles are the ones along the bottom. In your torso, as we breathe, we have our pelvic floor muscles, our core muscles around the front and wrapping around the back, and our diaphragm. And as you breathe, they expand and contract. And the various ways that we're moving our breath around can create different pressures throughout that canister of body. That makes sense. So when we're doing different movements like a sit-up and we have the coning, that's some of that inner abdominal pressure is pushing forward. Like you said, it's my organs pushing out. Great. I don't know if that's quite the accurate way to say it, but yes. And we see that the linea alba pushes forward. A similar way of, we can also think about this in the pelvic floor, that in ways that we're breathing, that kind of pushing outness of the linea alba between the abs, we can also experience pressure in different directions, like downward pressure of the pelvic floor, which is what we may be experiencing when we have that heaviness type sensation. So a lot of what I work with my clients on is learning how to breathe and learning how to identify where that pressure is going. So long answer to say, no, we don't want to be coning in our exercise that we're doing. It's not inherently dangerous or problematic if it happens in your life. If you are doing an exercise that you have some coning happening and you're trying to decide, do I keep doing this thing? Do I stop doing this thing? Here's how I would recommend you decide. First and foremost, if you have some coning happening, I just would change it with a client anyway, because there are other things that we could do. However, if you're quite attached to doing whatever that thing is, a good test is to take a look at whether or not the linea alba is soft or firm. So if it's super, super stretched and there's a lot of pressure and the linea alba is like really taut, then that's an indication that we want to back it off. We want it to be not under so much pressure. So that's a decent way that we can gauge things. It's hard if you're doing anything that is, like I was talking to a friend the other day about, she does CrossFit and she was doing toes to bar. So for anyone who knows, it's like you're hanging on the bar, you're swinging around. There's a lot happening really fast. That's the kind of thing you can't test, like how much tension is my linea alba under when I'm doing a toe to bar? Like we don't know. We're not going to freeze you in the middle of it and poke it. So that's the kind of thing that if we visually see it, we'd be like, depending on where you are in your journey, if you're pregnant or recently postpartum, like then let's just pivot and do something else that's a little more controlled than that. So that's why it comes back to the other point of we want to be doing things that are within our capacity, within our control, and that we can do with control. So another long answer, but a quick question.
I'm getting all these curiosities satisfied. Thank you.
Yay. I'm so glad.
Okay, so second trimester, I think you covered a lot of carries. Now your center of gravity is shifting, and some of those other things are coming on. So, how about third trimester?
Third trimester. Yes, let's get into that. So, I actually just remembered a big one that I have not mentioned that applies across the board. So now that we're talking about the actual exercise and what to do, as opposed to just what to know about the body. The other thing that I bring in first trimester and work with my women on across the board is what I was starting to talk about with the pressure and the breathing, is I work with my women starting at the very, very beginning to learn new patterns of breathing and how to connect with their pelvic floor, and doing their breaths in a way that they start to learn how to tune into feeling the pelvic floor, activating it, letting it fully relax. And we work with some breathwork stuff to tune them in, and we do that across the board. So that also applies to first and second trimester. but that's going to change a little bit in the third trimester, now that we're here in the third. So in first and second, we're doing a lot of intentional pelvic floor strengthening, activation, tuning in type of work. In the latter third trimester, we start to back that off a bit, and we start to make that focus more about letting the pelvic floor relax and getting soft and breathing gentleness into the pelvic floor. So the third trimester, a big shift that we see is starting to soften, slow down, especially in the pelvic floor stuff, to allow body to prepare for labor. So third trimester, we're running into even more of, all right, belly is here and it's getting pretty big now. We're probably experiencing a fair bit more of that pelvic heaviness, noticing some symptoms as we do things. So as far as movements go, I still love the carries. I use those a lot still in that time, particularly for core type work. But third trimester, I also start to bring in a lot of pelvic rest. So if I'm working with a woman through, say, a round of 3 things, and she starts to notice some of that pelvic heaviness, we're going to put her into a puppy pose or some sort of position that is going to elevate her hips a little bit higher than her shoulders to allow her pelvic floor some rest. So we're taking some of the weight off of pelvic floor. So in the third trimester, we've got more pelvic heaviness going on. So we want to give the pelvic floor muscles a break. So we bring in the pelvic rest. We start to do more relaxation type stuff for the pelvic floor. And let's see, what else in this time? We're starting to adjust for belly being there big time. So moving in some different patterns and working around belly. But those are the big ones, is starting to calm down the pelvic floor and giving it rest as needed.
Do you feel like most people just naturally want to wind down a little bit and back off of doing really vigorous exercise during the third trimester, even people who are usually pretty gung-ho?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For the most part. Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I tend to, a lot of the women that I work with are really like, they're far on the scale of super active, really gung-ho, wanting to do things. So I do sometimes get the occasional woman who I'm really having to be like, we're gonna slow down. Like, we're gonna do less. But across the board, yeah, most women are experiencing like, all right, we gotta dial it down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. I think that's all I have. Is there anything you want to add in here or any resources you want to share before we say goodbye?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of 2 more points that I just want to make sure to hit. Number 1 is that everything we've talked about is under the assumption that you don't have any conditions that make exercise a contraindication during pregnancy. So as we're talking about this, exercise is safe unless your physician has informed you of something going on with your specific pregnancy that makes it not a good idea. One of those is placenta previa, where the placenta is blocking, is like over the vaginal canal. And those are things that your doctor can help you understand. And I just recommend for women making sure that they have the green light in terms of those things, because there are absolutely some instances where exercise is not a good idea during pregnancy. So I just wanted to say that, like, we're talking normal, no contraindications. And then my second thing here is I just wanted to really throw some hype to the pelvic floor physical therapy profession. And I work very closely with them. And if you're experiencing a lot of pelvic heaviness or any pelvic symptoms or incontinence as you're trying to exercise or postpartum, I can't recommend enough that you pursue being seen with a pelvic floor PT. They're incredible. They're amazing. And there are solutions to those challenges that you might be experiencing. And myself as a perinatal exercise professional, I don't have all the tools in my toolbox for those things. So I just wanted to say pelvic floor PT, can't recommend it enough. They're amazing. And if I had it my way, every woman would get to have pelvic floor PT, especially postpartum. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you. I'm in full agreement. Thank you for saying that. And even things like hip pain, pelvic pain, pubic symphysis pain, lower back pain, right? So
amen.
All those kinds of things, go see your pelvic floor PT.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. How can people find you? Like what do you want to recommend as far as just your resources that you have? Is there a website? Is there a better way to find those things?
Yeah, I do have a website. It's www.femstrong.co, not .com, unfortunately. .co. I'm also on Instagram as FemStrong_. I have a podcast where I interview perinatal professionals and we cover a range of topics. I love the podcast. And then as far as finding me, working with me goes, I am virtual and in East Austin. So I work with women virtually and in East. And then my two big things that I want everyone to know exists are FemStrong Foundations, which is the 3 videos. One is the pelvic floor information with my pelvic floor physical therapist friend, Jenny. She's so smart. She's amazing. The other video is perinatal exercise. And the third is holistic perinatal nutrition with Estefania Yaneza Garcia. She is also incredible, super smart woman, and you get the guidebook. So that's available online if anyone's like, I would like this information consolidated in a way that I can access it. That's available. And then my other program is called Fearful to Fearless, and that includes all of that plus one-on-one with me and with Estefania to implement and personalize. So if anyone is looking for do it for me, help me take the thought out of it, here for it, I can help you. But also if you're looking for free content, podcast.
Okay. And I can second the podcast because I've done that. I've been listening.
Yeah, I want to hear what you think.
I love it. Thank you so much for being here.